I don't believe that's called a collaborative exchange of scientific ideas, is it? It's called a defense. Even the word is a me against you kind of thing. And can you imagine if you said that in an interview? All of a sudden you've separated yourself from everybody else.
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week, we talk with a former PI who now helps academics transition into industry. Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 79. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Good morning, Dan.
Bonjour, Josh.
This is new. It's morning.
Yeah, this is the time that our schedules worked out to record, so we're going to try and knock this thing out and get on with our day, I guess. It's weird. I assume this means we're not drinking.
Well, we considered having a beer because that's what we do. But
little morning ethanol, that sounds like a really the road to a bad place.
I mean, it is not even 9 a.m. yet.
Yeah, day drinking is bad. How about morning drinking?
So we are featuring on the show this week for the first time coffee.
Okay, so that probably doesn't have any ethanol in it whatsoever, but I'm excited to try this. So tell me you did something fancy and hipster, please.
Well, I did, because listeners of the show may not know this, but if I was stranded on an island and had to choose one beverage between beer, wine, liquor, or coffee, I would choose coffee.
I think that's hands down, right?
Yeah, I can't live without my coffee.
Plus, you could grow it on your island.
Well,
theoretically, if it's nice and tropical.
That's a good point. So what I did, Dan, this is I used my Chemex to do a pour over for you today.
That's the glass kind of tubular hourglass thing?
Yeah, so the scientist in me really loves the Chemex. I don't know if this is true, but I think the story is there was a chemist who really loved his coffee and he got tired of walking wherever he had to walk to get his coffee. So he realized he could repurpose some old chemistry glassware into a coffee brewing device.
Giant no-no. I hope that environmental health and safety doesn't wander by.
Well, the Chemex glass device that I purchased was uniquely for coffee brewing. I have not done any chemistry.
Okay, well, let me give this a try. Well, I see that it has been lightened somehow. Have you added...
Yeah, I went ahead and I added some whole milk to it before you came.
Whole milk? What am I, an animal? There's no half and half?
To me, the whole milk is really the way to go. Half and half, I think that's like an American thing. I'm not a half and half.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a half and half person.
And I didn't have any.
That also helps. Now, the Chemex that I've seen, the reason I'm not a fan of the design is because it seems like it's hard to clean. Is it hard to clean?
I just give it a rinse. As long as you give it a rinse immediately after using, you're good to go.
You don't need a bottle brush and a drying rack above your sink?
You could, but I think a little of the scum on the bottom really adds to the seasoning. So I will say...
What is this? Excuse me.
So we're drinking, Dan, this is a Gray Squirrel Sweet Sea House Blend from Carrboro, North Carolina. My special recipe, and Dan, you've been doing this a long time, but I actually use a kitchen scale to weigh out I have my burr grinder.
Yeah, I don't have one of those yet.
To get an even grind. And so what we did here is we had 40 grams of our coffee ground and add a 1:16 ratio of coffee to water. And that's what we got.
Okay, well, it's excellent. And, you don't get any of the kind of harsh bitter or harsh acid taste that you would maybe get from an older coffee or something from Folgers.
I was making this for my in-laws one time, and my mother-in-law said, "Oh, that's so fancy." I was like, it's really not. It's pouring hot water over coffee grounds, right?
Over beans. Yeah, there are like two things in it.
Couldn't get simpler. It's unlike your Keurig, right? I mean, to me, that's fancy, right?
That has hydrocarbons leaching out of the plastic for the extra flavor.
Dan, before we get into our topic, I wanted to share some good news. The first good news is we hit 100,000 downloads last week.
That is incredible.
Yeah, that is certainly a milestone for us, and I'm blown away by that.
And you got 98,000 of those, yeah?
Well, my mom was at least 1,000 probably, but...
No, it is, we track these metrics because it helps us to see, are we talking to ourselves basically, or are people downloading, listening, sharing, And you are, and that's just amazing to us. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, and we had listeners from all 50 states and over 100 countries.
We got Wyoming?
We finally got South Dakota and Wyoming.
Yes.
So that's good news.
Hello, Wyoming.
The other good news, Dan, is we had 3 new Patreon supporters.
Oh, that's even better. These must correlate.
So big thanks to Peter, Brent, and Rick for their generous support. And we are raising a glass to you. Well, actually...
A mug, 2 mugs.
2 coffee mugs. And so one of the things we're going to do is we're going to be organizing a special chat with our Patreon supporters this fall. So stay tuned for details on that. We will communicate with you to set that up. But if you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, or if you'd like to become a supporter of the show, you can go to patreon.com/HelloPhD or click the Become a Patron button on our website. Dan, you ready for some science in the news?
I'm always ready.
All right, Dan, this is a quick one, but one I wanted to share because it's somewhat of an update on a past episode. Dan, we've talked about the GRE a couple times previously.
Many times, yeah. This is a crusade of yours.
Yeah, as our listeners probably know, and as you certainly know, Dan, my colleagues and I did some research on our own graduate students at UNC Chapel Hill. We worked with some colleagues at Vanderbilt who did their own study, and we found across the board the GRE was not predictive of how well grad students actually do in grad school, which is probably not at all a surprise to any of our listeners.
No, and I remember we talked about, what would the world look like if we stopped requiring it because it no longer has any predictive power. But in my opinion, this was going to take 50 years until people forgot about what the GRE was.
Well, Dan, we might find out the answer to your question because just this past week, the Michigan PIBS program, or Program in Biomedical Sciences, announced that they will be dropping the GRE requirement starting next year.
And is this based on some of that research? Or did they do some of their own kind of internal analysis?
It absolutely is. And so what they did is really cool, I think. They really put some time and effort into studying this issue. So they developed 2 teams of faculty, each who developed a white paper for and against the use of the GRE. And they had a public town hall discussion about the merits and drawbacks of the GRE that was attended by students, postdocs, and faculty. And they came to the overwhelming conclusion that there was really no need to continue the GRE. And one thing I'm excited about, Dan, I've pulled up this white paper against using the GRE. As we scroll through, there are 2 images. You might notice this second image is a poster I presented of the paper that we published. So
that's incredible, and what a cool format for figuring out whether we want to continue as a university to use this system. I am really curious to know what the 4 team presented. What were their arguments for wanting to maintain the GRE? That'd be fascinating to read.
Yeah, well, if anybody's interested in reading the for or against, Michigan has posted all this online, so we can post a link to both of those white papers. But Scott Barolo, who's the director of the PIBS program, he said that they came to the conclusion that the exam's ability to predict student performance seems weak at best, while significantly disadvantaging women, minorities, and students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and also continuing to ask students to invest money and effort in a test whose usefulness our faculty cannot agree on would be a questionable policy. So they're dropping it. And then very soon after that, through a tweet, which I guess is now a valid way to make any major announcement.
Like international policy, for instance.
UC Berkeley also announced their molecular cell biology program will also be dropping the GRE.
This seems like the first 1 or 2 dominoes starting to fall. Maybe you'll get a cascade.
Yeah, I think the momentum's going in this direction. So if you know of any of what your graduate programs are doing, if they're making any changes regarding the GRE, certainly we would love to know. But Dan, I'll say this. I studied microbiology for about over 10 years and published some papers. But I will say 100%, I've never been more proud and excited about research that I've done than this GRE work.
Well, it's actually getting application. I mean, when you're publishing on the 55th amino acid in your protein, you know that you're years away from any kind of clinical trial or application. But when you're talking about changing graduate training, There's no reason it couldn't change fast. I'm surprised it's changing so fast, but there's no reason that they can't do it.
I am too, but we will certainly keep you all posted as the new developments unfold. All right, Dan, you ready for our topic?
I'm ready.
All right, Dan, you set up a really cool interview for us this week that I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of. I know I did. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who we are talking to this week?
This week, Josh, we got the chance to talk with Randy Ribaudo. Now, Randy was a PhD, just like us, and he was a PI, actually, at the NIH, where he did some cancer research. Through that process, he started using some software to do some of his genetic analysis, and he got in contact with the makers of that software and started giving them feedback. Over time, they developed this relationship where he actually went to work for this software company. And they got picked up by some other company. He had some other stints in industry labs until he finally landed at a place now where he's helping train academic scientists and teaching them how to find, apply for, and land these industry jobs. He's got so much to say about that process that I think our listeners who are interested in maybe moving out of academia and into industry, or even staying within academia, I think you're going to get a lot out of this interview.
Yeah, I think what's cool about Randy is he's really experienced the gamut of different types of research environments.
Yeah, so he's seen both sides. He's seen what it looks like to work in an academic lab, and he's seen what it looks like to be part of an industry lab. And the contrasts are important, but the similarities are important too. And he'll unpack that in this interview. Mm-hmm. This interview went on for about an hour and a half, Josh. We had so much to talk to Randy about. We had so much in common that we wanted to share. So we had to cut it way down for this episode. But what I'd like to do is to release the full interview for our Patreon subscribers. And what Randy talks about in the parts that we weren't able to include in the show are his actual process in how he went from his PhD in Connecticut to working at companies like Solera and then on to his training now. So if you want to hear about that process plus some more outtakes and things from the interview, you'll find that for Patreon subscribers on our website.
My name is Randy Ribaudo. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SciPhD Programs. Our focus on SciPhD is helping academic scientists best prepare themselves for professional careers. Our emphasis is on transitioning from academia to industry jobs, but the things that we talk about are just as relevant for becoming successful within an academic environment.
You've been on both sides of that divide. You've been in the academic lab, you've been in the industry. And so I'm interested in this comparison.
The big difference that I've observed between most academic life and industry is that you work in cross-matrix teams in every company I've ever worked for or with, right? Either as an employee or as a consultant. You're always in a team-based environment, and the team invariably is made up not only of fellow scientists with similar backgrounds and interests and talents, but you've got marketing people, you may have finance people, you may have engineers. They're all different people because that represent the different interests that the company has, right? Everything a company does is driven towards a strategic goal that they've set, right? And then they have to deliver on that strategic goal on time and on budget, which brings in the whole project management piece. But in order to make that happen, there are business considerations as well as technical considerations, which gets to like one of the hallmarks of what we teach of this sort of the SciPhD, idea is that you have a brand, which is, as a scientist, you have a technical identity, right? Your scientific identity, you're an immunologist, you're a molecular biologist, whatever, but you need to have a business identity and a social identity because it's those two things together that allow you to effectively function in a team environment. And you don't have to be king of the hill. You don't have to be the expert all the time. In fact, it's not a good idea to be the expert all the time.
I think a lot of our grad students and postdocs would actually welcome that change from, I think sometimes...
How do you mean? That's interesting.
I think some of the... I think sometimes some of the frustrations and trepidation that trainees ultimately have with academia is not wanting to play that king of the hill game. They love science, they like working in teams, but as you mentioned, academia is not always set up that way. Each lab is almost its own little competitive island with other academic labs. And so I think this notion of going into an environment where you're working with a lot of different people with different expertise towards a common goal would actually be something that a lot of people would find very appealing.
Like, just for example, when I was at Solera, so, you have your base salary, right? Whatever that is. But then there's all the, the bonuses that happen are based on your performance review. So, the goals that you set with your boss, your manager, right? They get reviewed at the end of the year. Did you meet these milestones? Did you do this training that you agreed you were going to do? Did you bring in this amount of business, or depending on what your job is, right? Did you perform personally? But then there's also a modifier for your group, right? So how did your group perform, and what were the goals that group had by the division director, for example? And then there's the whole division, and then there's the company, right? So your compensation is based on not just your personal success, but it's based on the success of the company at its various different organizational levels as you go up the ladder. And I guess you can argue in some ways that an academic lab's success is based on the publications that are a contribution of all the different people in the lab, maybe. But I don't know, from my own experience, and certainly the experience of the thousands of graduate students and postdocs that we train, it's really very, it's your publications that matter, right? It's your invitations to speak at meetings. It's your personal achievements that are what gets you the nod.
So one thing I wanted to ask, you've mentioned it a couple of times, but I want to just, you and Dan have probably talked about it. Tell us a little bit about PhD. So what is PhD?
PhD is a program that my business partner, Larry Petkovic, and I developed that focuses on assisting academic scientists transition into professional careers. So just because of the way things are right now, what that means usually is how to transition out of academia into the private sector. But we really strongly believe that the things that we teach, the things that we talk about, are just as relevant in running a better academic lab as they are working at Pfizer, right? Because if you think about it, and I can speak from personal experience running a lab, you're basically the CEO of a small company, of a small startup, right? You are. I mean, you hire, you fire, you have a strategic plan, you have to worry about budget, you have to worry about personnel, and you have to get a return on investment, right? It's just, what is the currency? It's not necessarily money, publications and what we did notice. So now Todd and I were working with scientists from all these biotech and pharmaceutical companies for these various accounts that we had. And that's where we started noticing these big differences in behavior, right? But what was amazing was you had successful scientists, molecular biologists, chemists, cell biologists, immunologists, all in one room from different companies, and it wasn't a fight. It wasn't the typical, I know more than you, always trying to top something. You guys know what that's like, right? I mean, there's so many times I can recall in my academic career where you're in a lab meeting and you say something insightful, and then somebody else has to say something more insightful. And sometimes a PI has to say something even more insightful, because how can you be showed up by some lowly graduate student or postdoc?
That's how we ended up with a podcast. It's just me and Josh trying to prove that we know more than the others.
Exactly. So you're my good best example of a bad example.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
I'm trying to prove I know less than anybody on the topic.
By the way, I do think that humility is one of the most underappreciated traits for success, right?
It's not often rewarded in the lab, I don't think.
Well, not in the lab, but in life it is.
Yeah,
it is.
Fair.
Anyway, so we started connecting dots between sort of that, let's just call it passive or active arrogance that you see that is nurtured in academia. This, I am the expert, right? I have to be the expert. If I'm at a seminar and somebody's giving a talk, now I will only speak from personal experience, but I suspect that this is generally fairly broadly felt. When I'm at a seminar, I'd be listening, I'd be interested in the science, But when I'm thinking about raising my hand for a question, the question is as much to demonstrate to everybody else that I saw a flaw in what they said, or so that everybody else can know what I know that they don't realize yet, right?
Yeah,
And
you want to nail them on figure 5 subplot 2.
And it's not necessarily to further the discourse of science, is it? It's just as much so that other people know that you're so smart.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of our grad student postdoc listeners would be nodding their head and really probably are thinking about their own experience where, man, am I really paying attention because I think the science is cool and I want to learn, or, oh, I just got to come up with that one question, and once I get it in my head, I can...
Or worse, to be on the other side of it, when you're doing the presentation and you just know that everybody in the audience is looking for every nitpick flaw that they can find, so they can call you out on it, so you can be embarrassed on the stage.
That, and then you get someone who asks a question, and in their long-winded 2-minute question, they're also citing
their own papers, yeah,
page numbers because they have a photographic memory that they want everybody to know about, right?
Yeah.
It's all those things,
yeah,
right? And this is part of that I have to be the expert mentality that is poison in a collaborative, team-based environment. I mean, it's so pernicious in academia, right? When you finish your PhD, the big meeting that you have at the end I don't believe that's called a collaborative exchange of scientific ideas, is it? It's called a defense.
It is, yeah. There are things being hurled at you, yeah.
Even the word is a me against you kind of thing, right?
Yep.
And it's almost like a I don't know, like a fraternal kind of, we did it so you did it, not a hazing. It's
like a softer hazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
a rite of passage, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and so a lot of the big concern a lot of students have is, well, every time I read a job ad or I hear about other people, they say you have to have prior industry experience, right?
Yeah, what do you do about that? Because you can't get that until you have it. It makes no sense.
Well, all right. So first, let's unpack what that really means, right? Prior industry experience.
Yeah, why do they care? If I've got lab experience, that seems fine.
So first of all, you know that on the face of it, that's not true. It obviously isn't true because
no one will get hired. Yeah.
Those people who are telling you that, who work at Pfizer, have PhD after their name, which means that they were in academia. So somebody rolled the dice on them, right? Somebody took a chance. Okay. So the idea that you have to have prior industry experience is a myth. Now, there are some very interesting sort of factoids, though. So there was a study that was reported in Forbes a number of years ago. I could get you the citation if you want. Where they studied 20,000 new hires. Okay, and this isn't just scientists. I don't remember specifically, but I think it's everything from like teachers to engineers to construction workers. It's a broad, but it's 20,000. Okay, they studied 20,000 people, and the interesting thing about that was, if I remember the numbers right, because I actually have a slide on this that I use in my talks, 46% of those people lost their jobs within 18 months. That's almost 50%. But what's more interesting is that of the ones that lost their jobs, 89% were for attitudinal reasons, not because of a lack of technical skill. Right? Now, so for whatever reason, I mean, those are data, right? That's just data. So, all right. So let's just unpack that for a second. So that means it's sort of like infant mortality in electronics, right? Burn the computer for 3 weeks, and if those components don't fail, they're probably not going to fail for 20 years. If they're going to fail, they're going to fail early, right? So basically, what that study is telling us, if it's true, is that if you're going to screw up because you got a problem in the way that you conduct yourself, you're going to hoist that flag within the first 18 months and lose your job. So when the company says, this is my opinion, when a company says we want 3 to 5 years of industry experience, what they're really saying is that go work for some other company and make it through that 18-month gauntlet and don't get fired, and then I'll know you're not one of those 50%.
Then we know you're not crazy.
And
Right, and we're not going to have to worry about you
Yeah.
being poisoned in our organization.
Mhm.
So that still doesn't help you with, well, what do you do about it?
no, do you think
What?
this is in recognition of the fact that there is such a team focus in industry and such an individual focus in academia? Is that, in your experiences, that's what leading to this attitudinal
Absolutely.
minefield?
Yes, it's that. I don't know if I'd put it quite that way. What I'd say is that it is the recognition that teamwork and being a learner is just as important or more important as being an expert, sort of the Daniel Goleman kind of stuff, right? The emotional intelligence stuff. Um, and so it's and the prejudice that exists with regard to the academic PhD, right? There's other studies that that show, they've asked companies. There's a study of 100 companies in the UK. This was in Vitae, had an article about this a few years ago, where they interviewed people in companies like biotech and pharma who hire PhDs. They value PhDs. And they said, "What's your preconceived notion of the academic PhD, the generic academic PhD?" And they say, "Oh, drive and motivation. They're all over it. They work so hard. They work 18 hours a day, right? They crank it. Um, data analysis, awesome. Problem solving, terrific. Interpersonal skills, yeah, I don't know. Commercial awareness, they don't even know what that means. Project management, I don't know. So anything that gets away from the technical skills and the drive, the prejudice is that coming out of academia, you don't get it. And so they're concerned and the knowledge of that 50% of people fail and 90% of those are because of this lack of awareness, right, of the collaborative nature of the real world. They're basically saying, you're going to have to prove to me that you have what it takes to work in this team-based environment, where if you walk in there and just act like the expert all the time, you're going to decrease the performance of other people, and that's going to hurt the company.
So let's imagine we have, actually, this is probably true, that we've got someone listening to this interview and they're a grad student or postdoc who is curious or interested in maybe transitioning to an industry career, after they get their degree, but they obviously don't have that experience yet. What advice would you give them right now during their training to help them to be competitive for that transition?
Okay, so there's two parts to that answer. The first part is I will challenge your suggestion that they don't have the experience. True, they don't have the industry experience, but I would argue that many, if not most of them, actually do have the equivalent experience. And I say that for two reasons. The first reason is that if you look at the scientific process, right, the scientific method, hypothesis, organize your team, which is admittedly a small team. It's you and your PI and maybe an admin that orders all the stuff for your lab and whatnot, or a collaborator. Plan the work, execute, communicate, return, then the financial accounting, making sure you did it on time and on budget and you met your objectives. And then you go back to your original hypothesis. Did I answer it? Do I have to modify it? And you go around and around and around, right? Compare that. It's overly simplified, but that's what it is. The business life cycle is something like this. You have a strategic plan that the company says, we're going to go after cardiovascular disease because we have some intellectual property or whatever. That's what we're going to do. We assemble our team. Now it's a bigger team. Now, as we mentioned, this is not just the scientists. It's engineers, it's finance, it's senior executives, it's project managers, it's all those different people, marketing, whatever. And you have a project manager then that plans everything out, milestones, deliverables, all that stuff. And that gets into the project management realm. But then you execute and you make sure that the work you're doing is always focused on the strategic plan. And then you communicate, whether it's press releases, communications to investors or to Wall Street, right? Marketing pieces. And then there's definitely the bean counters doing the return on investment piece. And the second rule of business says you have to continuously improve. So you go back to your strategic plan. Did we do it? Yes, we did it. Now let's do it faster, better, cheaper, or else someone's going to beat us. So my point is that the business life cycle superimposes almost perfectly on the academic scientific method. So I would argue that, for example, Josh, when you're designing experiments, right? When I say, tell me about how you design your experiments. Well, I had to figure out, the time course for this, and I had to figure out the replicates. And so I decided, and you get into a technical discussion about all the planning you did for experiments. I said, oh, wait a minute. So what you're telling me is that you had to look at quality control, which is why you did replicates. You had a risk management strategy, right, and a plan B in case something didn't work, right? So there's all you could reframe your academic experiences using the language of business, which would include things like production, focus, execution, control, tactical planning, strategic planning, enabling, delegating, right? All these things. In fact, there are 23 of these core skills that we talk about that map directly to both that business process and to the scientific method.
I mean, this is pretty encouraging and astounding if what you're saying is true. What you're telling us is it's not that the training you're getting in graduate school and as a postdoc are not appropriate and commensurate with what you need in industry. What you're saying is it's a dialect problem.
I was glazing over with all these business terms that I'm not familiar with.
Right.
Are there good resources out there for students and postdocs to start to learn this language of business?
Well, we're one of them, I guess.
It's called PhD, yeah.
Yeah, so actually, tell us
let's get it
about PhD and what it offers to trainees.
I guess it's predicated on this notion that scientists are leaders, they just don't know it, right? You are taught, I mean, you think about it. What is a PhD really? You're a problem solver. That's what you are, right? I would put a PhD up against an MBA any day of the week to figure out why the car won't start or the refrigerator stopped working, right? Or you can't lock a door anymore. It could be a mechanical thing. It could be an electrical thing. We know how to change one variable at a time. You're not always going to get the answer, but we are problem solvers. That's what we've been trained to do. And it's a discipline, it's a talent that is incredibly valuable, right? So the problem or the missed opportunity, it's not a problem. The missed opportunity is that many people who are they don't take full advantage of what a PhD has really given them, right? The deductive logic and the scientific method has given them. And PhD really, in some ways, it's sort of like it's a 12-step program in some ways, I guess. It makes you feel better about you actually have a lot more to offer than all the molecular biology skills that you learned, right? There's a lot more to what you have than that you have mentored people. You kind of forget about the fact that there were high school students that matriculated through the lab that you actually wound up inspiring to do something else. That you are the one that they constantly go to explain to somebody else what's going on because you just have this knack for being able to do it. Or you are the QA, the quality assurance, quality control expert. You're the one that runs the gels reproducibly better than anybody else all the time because you have attention to detail. And there's this other person in the lab who's more the intuitive thinker who comes up with the brain ideas, but you got to pull it away from them because they'll never execute, right? Those are all business problems. Those aren't science problems. Those are business problems. It's just, again, this gets back to that language thing. Okay, so what does PhD do? So first of all, we try and demystify the real differences between academia and industry. Okay, how does science work in industry versus academia? And the biggest difference there has nothing to do with the technology. The technology is the same. What's different is you do it in a team environment where you've got to get out of this expert mode, that you're always the expert, that everybody's always looking to you for the answer. This notion of shifting from expert to learner and not always answering questions, right? When somebody asks you a question, maybe ask them a question rather than come right in with the answer, because even though they ask you a question, they may not have really phrased it the way they really wanted to. So asking a question of them to get more information before you then give the right answer, number one, it tells the other person, I value your input, as opposed to shut up and listen to me, right? And you elevate their perceived value in the group. So that motivates them, right? That makes them want to work with you more. So, all right. So the first part of PhD is to first understand how things work in a well-run organization. Now, there are crappy organizations too that do the same things, right? It's all pit one postdoc against the other kind of thing. I mean, that exists. But first understand the two rules of business. You got to make a profit and continuous improvement, which everything else flows from that, and the idea of a team environment. Okay, then show them how so much of what they have done actually does map to those core skills, that business life cycle, right? The scientific method, business life cycle being the same thing. So the first thing that happens then is they go like, wow, maybe there is some hope for me in the first place. Okay. Well, and then once they understand that, then mechanically, what the next thing we do is we give them a homework assignment before any PhD event. Every person who's going to come to one of our workshops or boot camps or certificate programs we give them some resources. They have to go out and find a job ad, something they would really like to do. It doesn't have to be science. I don't care what it is. Go find a job ad, print it out, and we give them a form where they have to identify the top 3 to 5 skills necessary to be competitive for that job. And that's all we tell them. And so they come with that information. And most of them have a list of 3 to 5 things like CRISPR or mass spectrometry or whatever. And they have
techniques,
all technical stuff. So then, I tell them about that Forbes study. I tell them about these other things. We talk about the business and the social skills and the 6 areas. The business life cycle. There are 6 major areas, right? I don't know if you caught that, but it was right: vision, developing people, execution, achieving results, communications, and finance. So we then go back to that job ad, and I show them how to actually dissect a job ad. Well, first I show them, here's my job. I found one, and I highlight, here's all the science. Oh, molecular biology, phage display, blah, 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 all these things. I said, but look at what else is in this job ad. There's all these references to lead a group, work independently, manage multiple projects simultaneously, lead collaborations, good oral and written skills. And these are all references to these same 23 skills in these 6 major areas. So then I show them how you can actually map a job ad quantitatively, list out what all those skills are, identify the ones that are highlighted the most, and then learn how to develop a targeted resume that focuses on all of those, not just your science.
This sounds really amazing because it's so focused and so applied on the actual process. Understand what they're asking for, and then tailor your application to fit it. I assume that a job opening in an industry position gets hundreds, thousands of applications.
Yes, right. It's typically it depends how big the company, 500 to 1,500 applicants, and that's the thing, Dan. That's exactly So Pfizer's looking for a molecular biologist, right? And like you said, you get hundreds to 1,000 people applying for that job that all have a PhD in molecular biology.
Yeah, now what?
Right. Every one of them can run a gel, can do HPLC, right? They can all do the technical things that you learn to do to get to earn a PhD in molecular biology, right? They all can do it. So what makes you think that you're going to differentiate yourself based on any of that? Now, they will. That's going to be the first cut. I'm not saying that your technical skills aren't important. In fact, they're critically important. But Pfizer's in the driver's seat, right? They can say, we're going to take, and they let HR screen the resumes for those technical skills. Here's the list of things we need for this job. You got to be able to run a mass spec platform. You got to be able to do tissue culture. And they'll have a bunch of people in HR that read the resumes and do the little checkbox and make sure that those things are covered. And if the person looks good otherwise, but there's something missing, they get them on the phone. They say, we're trying to clarify. And so they can vet the science. But you're not going to get hired. All that means is that that's a ticket to play. And what's going to get you hired is your business identity and your social identity. And the whole rest of the day, if it's our half-day workshop, is spent on what that means. What is your business identity? What is your social identity? If it's a half-day workshop, I can't transform them, but I can teach them the importance of networking, the importance of being a listener, the importance of being able to communicate your experiences in non-scientific terms. So rather than when I say collaborate, if you're in an interview in a job and they say, one of the things that has been the driving force for this company is our innovation. We are the most innovative company, and we're looking for everybody who is that innovative peek to them. Tell me about a time when you had a problem and you used your innovation to solve that problem. Well, most scientists, they start getting into all the gory details of the science and how their science was, you know, and I'm glazing over. It's a missed opportunity to talk about, well, innovation isn't just about me. Innovation was about me talking with some of my colleagues and listening to them and coming up with a novel idea based on some input from them and also crediting them. And that stuff actually happened to me. I remember at the NIH going out to dinner, pounding beers with my friends at 7 o'clock at night after a long day in the lab. And Andrea Sant would say something, Randy, do you ever think about doing this? I'm like, what a great idea. And you go back that night and you set up the experiment. Did I credit her for it? Probably not. That's all my idea now, right? But those are the kinds of things that you can do. They're missed opportunities if only you knew to take advantage of that. And can you imagine if you said that in an interview? All of a sudden, you've separated yourself from everybody else.
You know, what struck me as you were telling that story and highlighting some of these characteristics that would set you apart in an industry interview is I'm thinking even if you're not interested in being an industry scientist, some of these characteristics and skills would make you a better academic scientist or would make you a better individual in whatever industry you're in or whatever direction you decide to go with your PhD.
Yeah, there are things that I think academia can adapt and learn from industry, and probably the same in the other direction. But let's talk about that a second.
But yeah, to ask the question more specifically, you've been in academia, so you know what it's like there, obviously. What advice would you give to academia and academic labs to help them improve and be more successful?
Reward collaboration, right? Reward teamwork. Encouraging your postdocs to collaborate with each other in and out of lab meeting and help each other with things, putting them on collaborative projects. The old-fashioned pit one postdoc against another on the same project because that's going to motivate him to work harder. One wins, one loses. That's not my problem. That's their problem. That has got to go away. I also have to think what's going to happen is that because information is 24/7 and instantaneous, PIs who continue to run their labs in a dictatorial top-down approach that does not inspire, that does not reward the kinds of things that are going to make you competitive for the real world. I'd like to think that what's going to happen ultimately is they're going to effectively get blackballed, that people aren't going to want to work in those labs, and they're going to know that those are dead ends unless you want to be an academic scientist, maybe. And now they're not going to get the cream of the crop anymore. And there are, but at the same time, there are ways that you can, even in a perhaps less conducive lab like that, there's still things you can do. Like, for example, so another big part of what we talk about is networking. How do you network? How do you establish relationships? And one of the things I tell people is that, the vendors that come into the lab where everybody scurries over to their desk to act like they're busy because they don't want to talk to the sales guy all the time, right? You should develop relationships with those people. Number one, when they leave your lab, they're going to Pfizer, they're going to Merck, they're going to Lilly, right? And they know people in those places. They could be advocates for you if you built a relationship with them, number one.
Yeah, I used to run because they would come in with literature and not do the pressure sale, but they'd want to talk to you about what you were working on, and you'd make your way to the tissue culture hood and get your earphones on as fast as you possibly could.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, right?
Opportunity lost.
Exactly, because for example, what if you went to your PI, and let's say it is one of those PIs who isn't so receptive, right? But what if you said to the PI, hey, I'm willing to take over the dealing with the vendors and negotiating bulk consumables. I'd like to learn that, and it's going to help the lab. Are you okay with me taking that over, right? And even a self-serving PI might want to do that because he doesn't want to deal with it, right? So now you have an opportunity to, number one, build your net. So there's a self-serving reason why we're doing this, right? Because you're getting to know people. If you're willing to put up with that overbearing, idiotic, socially inept sales guy or woman, but you establish that relationship. You're the one that negotiates. And so now, in addition to having, through that one person, 200 or 500 or 1,000 other people that are second-level contacts in LinkedIn that you can connect with in companies where you may want to work or academia where you may want to work, you also have a line on your resume that says, responsible for negotiating laboratory consumables, resulting in a 15% reduction in laboratory overhead costs. One line.
Love that. Yeah.
Tell me that's not cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's all about reframing.
And this gets back to Josh, what what I was in the beginning. There's so many things you could do. You don't need in your resume to talk about the name of every gene that you identified and what its position is on chromosome 14 and all that kind of crap. You could just talk about that, managed multiple projects, including identification of gene important for this, resulting in 2 peer-reviewed publications. Give an accomplishment. I don't give a damn how many things you've done if you've got no accomplishment for it, right? If you tell someone you've mentored 35 people, oh, wow, that's pretty impressive. And then I say, well, what happened to those 35 people? And you tell me they all left science. Okay, that's not so cool anymore.
Or I don't know.
7 people, 5 of whom are in PhD programs now, and the other 2 got jobs in biotechs as technicians. Like, wow, you did a good job. So it's all about accomplishments, and yeah. So that's what we do, and we go from half-day programs where they come out of a half-day program understanding that whole new identity and helping define their own scientific, business, and social identity as a brand, how to build a network. We actually have them network on the fly. We force them to do it. They have to introduce themselves to other people, and they realize it's really not that hard. Learn where you can go to put yourself in the same room with people who can help you down the line. And then in our bigger programs, we actually get into, full modules on advanced communication, style flexibility, the MBTI stuff, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, technical literacy, project management, mentoring and delegation, finance. Really cool finance exercise where they have $600 million and they set up as companies. So one table is a venture capital company, another table is a holding company, another table is a medical device company, another table is a bank, right? And they all have scenarios, and they get cash. They get $1 million bills that they have to then do mergers and acquisitions. They have to evaluate a company, figure out what it's worth to make an offer to buy them. A bank has to lend money, but they have to figure out what the company's worth so they can figure out whether it's a good risk or a bad. So we make them do stuff. It's not a lecture thing. Everything is all doing stuff. Continuous improvement. They learn, benchmarking, brainstorming, priority matrix, SWOT analysis. How do companies improve? That second rule of business. And they do it. They form a company. They come up with an idea as a table for their new company based on somebody's real technology. And then they have to brainstorm how they're going to get to the market, how they're going to turn a profit. And then what do they do when they get a 30% reduction in revenues? And then they do a SWOT analysis to figure out how to solve that problem.
It sounds so exciting. And I think for people who are listening from their lab, and if you are interested in this, I think hopefully you've gotten some encouragement that there is a path forward for you either in academia and maybe as a better PI than you would have been, but also in industry. How do they find you, Randy? How do they get into one of these boot camps or workshops or training sessions?
Right. So right now, most of our business is B2B, meaning that our business works directly with another institution. So, we run their certificate program at a lot of the best institutions like NYU and Rutgers and the California system, UC Irvine, UCSF and Davis as a consortium with Berkeley, Denver. So there's a lot of places where we have these 4-day certificate programs. We have a couple of places where we have regional programs. So in New York, we have that certificate program every year at the New York Academy of Sciences that's open to anybody who wants to, and they just go to the New York Academy of Sciences website and they, can register for it there and pay for it or get their PI to pay for it or whatever. Most of our relationships are with institutions though, and that's true for the certificate programs, the half-day workshops, the full-day programs, and the 2-day boot camps.
So if people want to find out about these things, they can go to your website, sciphd.com?
Yeah, www.sciphd.com, sciphd.com, and it describes pretty much all that stuff. And the other thing, we do have an online virtual career center, and that is continually advancing. Right now, the virtual career center is made up of, it's organized by 4 major questions that a lot of graduate students and postdocs are asking, like, what do I want to do when I grow up? What kind of job do I want to do? How do I prepare for a job? How do I figure out how much money I need to make? And I've forgotten what the fourth one is, but there are about 20 videos. They're about anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes long that deal with very specific topics.
Yeah, you've got a few available for free online. I encourage people to check those out because they're an extension of what we talked about today, but it's a really cool format for understanding some of these things.
Wow, what a cool interview.
Yeah, I left so encouraged after talking with Randy, and hopefully everybody who's listening does too. We have so many skills that we can maybe describe, but one of the most common things we hear, Josh, when somebody says, I want to work outside of the academic lab, but I don't know what I could do. I don't know what I'm qualified for. Maybe there are no jobs for me out there. And I think what Randy is saying is absolutely there are jobs. You're using the wrong terms to describe what it is you know how to do.
Yeah, and jobs that I'm qualified for. I mean, this is one of my crusades, Dan, is looking around, and this was true for me, and I believe it was true for you, and so many people right at the point of completing the PhD, is how often is your confidence level at an all-time low?
The lowest.
Oh, and that's the time when you need to be putting the most effort into your transition to really the launch pad for your career for the rest of your life. And how hard is it to do that when you're feeling so beaten down and such a low confidence state?
Well, and I love what Randy said there, in terms of your final foray in the academic lab is a defense. Like, you are being attacked. And so, of course, at the end of it, you're feeling terrible. You've just spent all this time having people kind of dump on your writing, on your experiments, on your work for the last 5 or however many years. And they're not dumping on it, but this kind of individualistic approach and this notion that we've got to always be the person in the room who is able to pick apart and show how you're wrong. It can be demoralizing, really can.
Yeah, and really that defense is the culmination of your 5 or 6 years of swimming in that environment, right? So that's been your day in and day out. And that was one of the things that really hit home for me, is how Randy contrasted the environment of industry versus academia. This almost how you have to retrain the way academics think, coming in from that environment you just described, where, I have to make sure I look good in this situation. And oftentimes, maybe every time, that's at the expense of people you're working with, because the reality of science, the reality, whether it's academic or industry or government or whatever, is team sport by nature. And so, I couldn't help but have this thought: how much could academic research improve if it would adopt some of these strategies employed by industry, where we really think about working as a team and work about and really humble ourselves a little bit, acknowledge the people who help us, and not just have this sort of capitalistic look out for number one. It's almost like academia is America and industry is Europe, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, that's a weird analogy, but I can follow you insofar as it is every man and woman for him or herself in academia. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. It'd be really tough. We talked at the beginning of the show about changing GRE requirements. That seems hard to me. Now, imagine changing the entire culture and the nature of scientific training. It's going to take time. But what we've got to do is the same thing that we're seeing with that GRE work. One university has to take the step, try it out, show us all what's possible, and then maybe slowly over time others will adopt it.
Well, industry, like Randy mentioned, they have 2 main things they want to do, right? They want to make profit and then do things better as they move forward. And so if this individualistic way of doing research was the best way, industry would be doing it that way.
They would have chosen that, sure.
And that's why they're not, because it's counterproductive. And really this pairs so nicely with the Google team research that we talked about a couple episodes ago. So I don't know, I hope academia is paying attention to some of these things happening in industry, because I really think it could be beneficial to PIs individually who maybe try to institute some of these practices in their own lab.
Absolutely. Now, after we had the interview, Josh, I told you I've been so encouraged this week just thinking about our talk with Randy. And, as a PhD working outside of my training field, I work in electrical energy efficiency type work in a software company. I don't mention my PhD ever if I can help it. Because if I say, oh yeah, I have a PhD, they say, oh, in what? And then I have to say, physiology. I can never say it's in electrical engineering or it's in something related to my field. I would have a very hard time tying my physiology. Oh, the giant squid axon patch clamp experiments show us that electricity. What am I going to do? So, my PhD. I think it's kind of like my PhD is like Fight Club. I just don't talk about it. But I'm rethinking that. I think
I almost feel like, Dan, you're still suffering from this.
I have imposter syndrome about
I think you are, because I would imagine, and you should try this and report back to us. Being more open about your PhD. I imagine most people would be really interested in not only that you have a PhD, but the differences in the types of things you studied in graduate school and what you learned there and how it applies and helps you now.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is where Randy has opened my eyes. There are words I can use to describe my PhD training that apply now, or I could use the words I used back in my lab, and it will go over people's head and they won't see it. And so I think, maybe I need to spend some time on his website, or if he's got a training kind of going on in my area, I need to check that out. But I think there's a way that I can translate it. And I don't have that. I don't have the words. I don't have the terminology or the lingo to be able to do it. But I'm thinking more about it, and I think that's positive.
Yeah, I think learning that language and doing what Randy said, being able to translate between the scientific method and the skills that you gained in an academic setting to a lot of this common terminology of things that happen in industry is a really important skill to learn. So I would encourage everyone who's interested in this, especially if you're interested in industry careers, to go to sciphd.com, check out some of the things they have there. If there's a training in the area, certainly do what you can to attend, or reach out to Randy. I'm sure he could point you in a good direction if you're looking for learning more. All right, Dan, thanks so much for setting that up. That was really fantastic.
All right, and are you ready for this week's etymology puzzle? We're a little bit late, but we've got an answer.
All right, what do you got?
Okay, the clue last time was, let's have a meeting where we present posters, give research talks, and drink together.
I like all of those things. Paradise?
Paradise, yeah, there it is. You solved it. Not quite.
What is it?
Okay, the answer is symposium. I actually got invited to a symposium this fall, so I was like, what does that word mean? Sim, that's together.
It's kind of a weird word.
It's a weird word. So sim is together, and posium comes from a word meaning to drink. So this was actually in Greece, there were these parties or gatherings where educated people would get together. They would talk about some subject, and of course they would drink. So we get this word symposium from the phrase drinking together.
Some of the best poster sessions I've been a part of are the ones that have beer and wine as part of them.
I think this podcast is a symposium, effectively,
Can
right?
you imagine this podcast if there was no beer?
I'm doing it right now. We got coffee.
Oh, that's true. So maybe this one's terrible.
So we're making it work. So, Josh, our winner this week is Dan from the Rockefeller.
Congratulations!
Not me, from the Rockefeller University. So, congratulations to Dan. He got the correct answer, symposium.
Good job, Dan.
And are you ready for the next puzzle?
I'm ready.
The clue is, an amber or glass rod can be used to demonstrate this force of nature. Read it one more time. An amber or glass rod can be used to demonstrate this force of nature. Remember, I'm looking for a scientific word described by the clue, and once you get it, you'll find the literal meaning of that science word as a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com. We'll randomly select a winner from all the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card.
All right, Dan, fantastic. This episode's gone on a little longer than usual, but thanks to everyone for hanging with us.
Plenty of coffee. We got energy. Let's go.
That's right. If you have a topic or question idea, we'd love to hear it. You can email us at podcast@hellophd.com, send us a tweet at hellophd, or leave us a message on our Facebook page. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. We love the feedback, and it helps new listeners find the show. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron. Simply go to our website, hellophd.com, and click on the Become a Patron button. Or you can visit patreon.com/hellophd. We would love the beer or coffee money. And Dan, we will be back at you next time.
See you then, Josh.